Hey, Mario, are you talking? You're on mute.
Oh, I'm so
Yeah,
sorry.
I was
Yes,
just gonna say the
I've
same.
been
Yeah.
okay. I've been talking for 3 minutes. Okay, so good. Sorry about that. Okay, so housekeeping a bit quicker this time. So thank you all very much for joining us. In terms of the agenda for today, we're going to start with some introductions. Kim is going to give us an introduction to LINDDUN and LINDDUN GO. We'll then be talking about some of my experiences using both LINDDUN and LINDDUN GO. And at the end, we're going to have a section for questions and answers. One thing that I'd like to mention is for everyone following the section along, please keep those questions coming in the Q&A as Kim is talking about LINDDUN and LINDDUN GO, because I will be interrupting Kim and asking us some questions whilst we are going through the content to make sure that it's informative for everyone. So without further ado, I'm Mario Platt, so I'm strategy director for Practical DevSecOps, and we've been doing some work together since the beginning, late last year. And Kim, who is joining us, is one of the key people behind LINDDUN, the LINDDUN framework, privacy threat modeling. She's a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Computer Science at KU Leuven in Belgium. I'm not sure I spelled that right. She has more than 10 years of experience in security and privacy in software development. And she's been doing some great work, which I'm lucky enough to have seen in Open Security Summit, etc. Because LINDDUN threat modeling really opened my security ideas to augment and implement some of these privacy engineering ideas into what I do, which was one of the main reasons why I'm so happy and a fan of the framework itself. So Kim, could you give us a bit of an introduction to yourself as well?
Yes, sure. So I will briefly skip my agenda. So I'm a postdoctoral researcher. I work at the Distrinet Research Group, which is also affiliated with IMAC. We're part of the Department of Computer Science at KU Leuven, and we're actually quite a big group. We have more than 80 people working. A lot of them are senior researchers. And we focus on these three main pillars, which are distributed software, secure software, and software engineering. We obviously have a lot of research projects. What is interesting, I think, is that they range from fundamental research, which is the stuff you think of when you think of academia, but it ranges all the way to ready-to-market research. That means that we also have a lot of collaborations with industry, which has led to quite some spin-off companies, and our group has been working on these three main pillars for more than 30 years. So I have been working there for, I have to think, more than 10 years already, 12, 13, something like that. Mainly working on privacy, although I started working on security. And my PhD also led to LINDDUN and an update of LINDDUN and an empirical study of LINDDUN. And throughout my postdoctoral research career, we have been extending and improving it further. So let me quickly get back to my agenda. I guess the floor is mine, or do you have to intervene, Mario? Still on mute.
Yes, thank you very much
Yes.
for providing that that background. So I think in order also to make sure that everyone's on the same page, we all already have some questions that were asked, but I would ask you if you could go on the presentation part, and I'll probably interrupt you as and when we get questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so as already introduced by Mario, I will talk about LINDDUN and LINDDUN GO. Obviously, I will start with some basic introduction what LINDDUN is, and then we'll zoom into some details and quickly walk you through the different steps with a tiny example. All right, so LINDDUN is a privacy engineering framework, which means that it provides systematic support. It's a systematic threat assessment method. Maybe a bit of history or origin story there. It actually, so I was working on a project where I was doing a security assessment. So we used Stride, obviously. And colleagues who had to do the same thing for privacy, they were looking at us and saying, wow, you can do this so systematically. You really have a method that sounds so interesting. But unfortunately for privacy, we have no idea and we just do some random stuff and hope it's okay. So this is great research material. So we joined forces and that led to LINDDUN. So it's very much inspired by Stride, I would say. If you look at it from more a GDPR compliance perspective, you could say it's kind of like the technical part of a DPIA, where there's this one requirement that says you need to make sure you have security measures in place, and that's about it. So how do you say that it's okay? You need to do a more systematic assessment. So it basically provides support to elicit and mitigate privacy threats in software architectures. Ideally, you do this early on in the development lifecycle, but you can also do it later on as an assessment for existing systems as well. So it's a method, it gives you step-by-step support, which is great, but I think one of the other advantages, similar to Stride, is the knowledge base. Because even though you know the steps and say, well, now you need to think of this type of element in your system, what do you need to think of? What is privacy? You need to be an expert to do that. And we see a lot of misunderstanding of the term as well. A lot of people think it's a synonym for confidentiality, and while confidentiality is important, it's much more than this. It's also about these privacy threat categories, which together form the acronym LINDDUN. And I will get into them in the next slides. Instead of giving you a very boring definition of each of the terms, I like to use animal pictures. And I think it also helps the understanding. So I will go through them rather quickly, but I just want to give you an idea of the privacy range we see here. And that it's more than just confidentiality.
So a question
yes.
before going into the different terms. A question
Sure.
coming from the Q&A. So how would you differentiate privacy and security threat modeling? So the focus on security engineering versus privacy engineering.
Yes. Well, I actually have a slide on this after my categories.
Okay.
Is that okay if I come back to that? Okay, perfect. So I wanted to give you some background on the different categories, so you already get a feeling of that it's still somewhat different, although there's a lot of similarity, of course. So identifiability and linkability are quite related. Often linkability leads to identifiability. So identifiability does not mean you know the social security number. It means that you know you can link it to the natural person. So it's often enough that you have a couple of properties, quasi or quasi identifiers, that you can link together that provide enough information to know who it is. In this picture, when I talk about the yellow duckling, then you all know which one I'm talking about without knowing its well, social security number would be weird, but DNA sequencing or whatever. There's also a different kind of linkability, which is less about identifiability, more about a more societal aspect, and that's linking multiple individuals together based on one or several properties. Like you have all these dogs that are connected to the same person. When you talk about linkability of different individuals to the same property, it can be people who live in the same neighborhood and have the same type of disease. That could have some impact on the fees that an insurance company would ask because certain areas would have a higher risk of a certain disease. So that's more the societal impact than an individual privacy impact. Then non-repudiation, which is an interesting one when you come from security. So non-repudiation is a security requirement, while it's a threat, a risk for privacy. So from a privacy perspective, you sometimes want plausible deniability. When you are voting, when you're building a whistleblowing system, for certain things, you would want to have plausible deniability. Will this often conflict security? Well, I never came across a system so far that has both plausible deniability requirements and non-repudiation requirements from a security perspective. You either are building something that really requires non-repudiation and secure logging and those kind of things, at least for one property or one type of data, you will not have the same plausible deniability requirement there. Detectability for the security people, it's kind of related to side channel attacks. So it's detecting that something is there without actually having access to the data, but you can deduce a lot of information from it. Like the picture, you don't see the animal, but you are pretty certain it's a snail. So the typical example there is that when you query a database and you don't have permission for the files, depending on the access control system, it will just say 0 found, or it might return the result saying 3 files found, but you cannot access them. By knowing that the files exist, you already know something when you're looking for a certain name in the database of a rehab facility. Just by knowing that the files exist, you can assume that that person has been there. Okay, so disclosure of information. This one is borrowed from Stride. It's a security property, which is also important for privacy, and it's basically about protecting your assets, access control, encryption, those kind of things. And then you have the more soft categories, which are unawareness and non-compliance. So it's related to transparency to the user. It's related to legislation, privacy and data protection legislation. We kind of shifted in LINDDUN Go, where we have unawareness being more about data subject rights. So in addition to transparency, it's also related to intervenability. And also in LINDDUN Go, the non-compliance really shifted to the processing principles. So just already some heads up that there might be a change when you look at the LINDDUN knowledge base and the LINDDUN Go knowledge base. So this is our privacy taxonomy, our privacy categories. There are a lot more. I think the most known are the ones by Hansen and the NIST. So it's basically the same, but with other terms. And it's like the security CIA. You also have other taxonomies and strategies and so on. if you're interested, I think these are really good sources to get started. So back to the question. When you know, so this was really quickly going through the different categories. Is this the only difference? Can we just do threat modeling the same way we do it for security? Well, these are roughly the steps for LINDDUN. So you start with modeling the system. Preferably, you create a data flow diagram. It's also great if you could describe the data, which is depending on the type of data flow you're creating. Types of data are being sent and communicated. It's good to know that information as well. Then you map the threats to the DFD elements, you identify the threats using threat trees, and you manage the threats by talking to your DPO preferably, because as a technical person, you might have different priorities than a legal person, and you try to mitigate. And in addition to this method, you also have knowledge support similar to Stride, where you have a mapping table, a threat taxonomy such as the threat trees, and some information for the solutions. So if you see this and you're familiar with Stride or other security threat modeling approaches, it's roughly the same. It maps to Adam Shostak's steps, like what are you working on, what can go wrong, what are you going to do about it. But it requires a different mindset. So I mentioned it already when I talked about modeling the system. Ideally, you know the data that are being communicated and stored. For privacy, it's about protecting personal data. For security, it's about protecting data in general. So those data can also be corporate data, which do not really classify as personal data. And I think one of the biggest differences from the mindset perspective are the assets that you are protecting. From a security perspective, you as a company, you as an owner of data want to protect the data. All it's your asset you want to keep safe. From a privacy perspective, you need to think as a data subject. You need to think as the data subject, so who the data belongs to, the data is about a certain person, and that person values his or her privacy, and you need to think about those aspects. And I think that is the biggest change of mind, because that also means that it's not just about protecting against some attacker. It also means that it's misbehavior you kind of do yourself as the company. You might be processing information that you do not need to process or that you do not need to store. So it's kind of difficult to talk about it as threats or as misactor, because well, so we're still trying to determine whether we can change the name a bit, because, well, if you tell a company that he's the attacker, that's not really a good plan. So I try to put kind of a definition on the difference I see. So security is to me, well, security, the confidentiality part of security is to me about preventing unauthorized access to the data, while privacy is about limiting the consequences of eventually sharing that personal data. So we can go deeper in the differences if there would be an interest. So I was asked by Mario to also go a bit into the different steps. So I showed this before. I have my really dummy example, which is the social network. from a very, very, very high abstract level. So we have the user, which connects through a portal to the backend service, where there is some data stored in the data store. So again, similar to those who know Stride, you have a mapping template that you instantiate, and you have basically a row for each of the DFD elements, and each of the axes in your table you will need to examine. And how do you know whether something is applicable? You can look at the different thread trees, again also inspired by Stride's thread trees. This is an example tree about identifiability of data flow. So if we look at an example, I guess most of you have come across the My Friend Kayla doll. It was in the news, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. It's a toy, but it's a Bluetooth enabled toy, kind of like Siri and Alexa and those things. So kids can ask questions to the doll, and through the phone of the parents, the questions are processed in the backend and some response is being sent back. So it's kind of safe to say that it's sensitive data, the kids' voice data. There's also background sound that can be processed, so there's a lot of sensitive stuff going on there. Unfortunately, the data flow is not protected. It's an insecure Bluetooth connection. There has been, it has been proven that it's really insecure, that you can easily hijack it when you're close by. And there's also another problem where the future receiver, so in the backend, the data are sent to a third-party voice analytics company that's also affiliated with the US military. So it's kind of scary to know that everything that is being said in your house is being processed together with military information. Well, you don't know, but of course it's not like the safest thing to do. So you already see 2 possible problems arising here. So you go through each of the axes, and either it becomes one or several threads that you document, or you make an assumption that that there are no applicable threads for that certain element for a specific LINDDUN category. And we always highlight that it's also important to not just document the threads, but also the assumptions, because when you later on revisit one of the assumptions, you want to be able to track back those decisions in your chart as well, and maybe some threads do occur. Yeah. So by documenting it this way and having your table really as a guide to your systematic approach, you also create some traceability of your assessment process, which is a plus when you need accountability, for example, for GDPR. This is an example of how you can document threads, but basically everybody has their own template. It was inspired by misuse cases, which are inspired by use cases. But yeah, it changed already throughout the years, that there's not that much left from the original misuse case, I think. Okay, so what happens then when you have gone through the entire table, you have your big list of threads and assumptions. You will want to first prioritize your threads, preferably in close dialogue with the DPO. LINDDUN does not suggest any specific risk assessment method. So basically risk is just the combination of impact and likelihood. there are, I think, some suggestions on the LINDDUN website for more detailed risk assessment. I know my colleague is working with a FAIR method, but basically you can fit in whatever you prefer. Yeah, so you can have like this kind of ad hoc assessment where you have a low, medium, high impact and likelihood assessment that can help you prioritize, or you can do it much more advanced. Then there's something, okay. Then you will want to mitigate it, obviously. LINDDUN also provides a set of mitigation strategies that will help you to eventually go to the solutions. And these mitigation strategies are linked back to the threat tree. So this is the taxonomy. Basically, we made a distinction between concealing the link before you share it and then how you can protect it once it has been shared. And we have this mapping with the threat trees, so you can easily go from the threat trees that belong to each of the threats and map them to your strategy. So in the example, we have been talking about transactional, about identifiability of data flow. So it's about protecting transactional data. And when you look in the final step, we have a mapping, we have a table of privacy enhancing technologies, which are structured according to these mitigation strategies. So if you look then for the transactional and contextual data protection, then you will end up in confidentiality and encryption solutions. This is the full table. It is kind of academic, I would say. It's also part of the ongoing work to extend this further and maybe link it to existing privacy patterns as well. So that was really, in a rush, LINDDUN in a nutshell. So what is the main summary of LINDDUN? It provides systematic support to elicit and mitigate privacy threats in software architectures. And it provides traceability and accountability because of the systematicity, because of the documentation of each of the steps, the big mapping table that you will use to go through it. And when you follow that, both the mapping table and you use the threat trees as input, you also have a certain level of thoroughness that can be guaranteed. The downside is that it's quite time consuming and labor intensive. It still requires some expertise. And because of that, we see that in practice, actually people still apply the knowledge kind of in an ad hoc way, or use the acronym as brainstorming, which is already great that you think about the different LINDDUN categories, but we wanted to give some more input there. So we were thinking about how can we also help people who are looking for a more lightweight approach. And this led to LINDDUN Go. The goal was to lower the threshold, to also get people that are new to privacy threat modeling involved, to make it less complex, to make it with less overhead. You saw in the example I rushed through that you had that big mapping table, you need to go over each of them. It quickly blows up when you have already like a medium-sized DFD, so it takes a lot of time. But when you remove it all, then you also lose your level of thoroughness. So we wanted to look for something in the middle. Again, we looked at the security side and looked at the elevation of privilege card game. It also has privacy extensions, which are great, we had the feeling that, well, of course, we like the LINDDUN taxonomy, which we like to include there. But also when we tried it out with students and in practice, we had the feeling that privacy is not that well known and that people need more guidance even. So we created our LINDDUN toolkit, our card tech, LINDDUN Go. And each card contains quite some support for people to get started. One of the additions is the hotspots. So for each of the cards, basically a threat type, we describe on what type of DFD interactions it can apply. So for instance, this is linkability of a credential. You need to look only at those parts of the system that have inbound user interaction and that include credentials. So rather than thinking about all the different parts of the system, this is a clear example where you only need to look at those specific parts. It links really closely to DFD, but we try to extend it a bit more because we see that people sometimes do not feel that confident with DFD. We have some general information, and we also have applicability assessment questions. So we have 2 questions that help people determine whether a threat is actually applicable. And the idea is also that it promotes collaborative threat elicitation. So ideally, you do this in small groups, and by doing it jointly, you will inspire each other. So just some positioning. It's really about the elicitation step. It's not about managing, it's not about solution space. We don't have any additional support for the modeling part. It's really about identifying threats. Was it? Yes. So it's really a simple instruction set. So the idea is that one person picks a card, thinks about whether he or she can come up with a threat, and then the next person tries to find more threats, and you continue until you went full circle. There's nobody who can identify another threat, and the next person of the group picks another card, and you continue. So the goal of continuing with the same card is that it can be that one card corresponds to multiple threats, and you want to avoid that you will miss the second or the third one when you just discard the card once you have identified a threat. I kind of already went through this, but I will show this anyway. So the hotspots kind of relate to DFD interactions with additional constraints. I mentioned before the difference with security and privacy threat modeling is that often the threat source is organizational. It's about the company, the system that does something with the information that is not privacy friendly for the data subject. You have the questions I mentioned, some examples, because we also got feedback that just some high-level information might be too complex, so we really want to have some examples in there as well. And we also had a lot of people asking, like, can you say what is the impact, what would be the risk? Ideally, everybody would want to get like almost a number here, or saying this is high risk, this is low risk. We have been looking into it, but the cards are so high level that it's, yeah, it really depends on the types of data that that the threat is involved with. Let me see. Yeah, so the main hotspot categories are about inbound flows, outbound flows, data storage and data retrieval, and some are about processes. And then for each of those types, you can get into more detail and talk about the data involved or the fact that there is some user interaction involved. We also have some variants where you often it's about making it quicker or more time boxed. Of course, you can just use the CARTEC as some kind of catalog you use when you do your threat modeling individually. And we also heard a lot of people were doing this acronym brainstorming. I think a lot of people do it for Stride as well. I think that's a great start. And just to support those people, we also included, but I forgot to put a screenshot in my slides, category cards. So for each of the LINDDUN GO categories, we included a card that gives a really, yes, Mario is showing it, that gives a brief summary of each of the categories, the definition, an example, and the main hotspots that are potential threat sources. That was my quick LINDDUN GO introduction. You can find it all on the website. If you're interested, I should still have some CARTECs left. You can send me a mail, and post lockdown, I will be happy to send you. This is not the only thing we have been working and are working on. One of the things that mainly my colleague Laurens is working on, I'm not sure whether he was able to join because I heard there was some problem connecting. So he's working on tool support and automation. This is like a screenshot, but if you're interested, I can give you some pointers to his work. He has been working on a tool which is called Sparta that applies the FAIR risk assessment method to basically automate risk assessment based on DFD input. That means also there's more fundamental research at the core, like what information do you need? How do you need to extend the DFD? What extra information do you need to have there? How can you represent security solutions or privacy solutions that impact the risk, and so on. But I'm just spreading the word. He's the expert there. Also, we're looking into data protection alignment. We already shifted a bit towards that with LINDDUN GO. We also are involved in a project locally at our university with the legal experts of our university, where we have created a data protection model. So a different representation of the system where you can easily do the legal impact assessment. So determine purpose, and there's the right legal basis for everything, that there's a collection activity before all processing activities. You can all do that legal analysis there as well. And it can be aligned with DFD, so you can really incorporate it in your entire architecture. Things we are also looking into, have been and will be, is extensions and refinements of the knowledge base, mainly focused on the threat knowledge, so that the trees. We have been looking into domain refinements, meaning that for certain domains, for certain types of applications, there will be specific threats that are more or less applicable. So it would be useful that we can highlight them. We have done some initial analysis for IoT. My colleague mainly has been working on blockchain. We currently have a master thesis that is looking into cloud. So we have different areas where we're looking into those refinements. We're also looking into updating our trees once more. They have been updated about 5 years ago, so it's about time, I guess, for a refresher. And we're also kind of dreaming of this one big knowledge base where you can easily extract, for example, a new version of LINDDUN GO, the input for tool support, an interactive catalog, some domain-specific catalogs, and so on. And there's lots more going on. We're looking also in the solution space about pattern alignment and so on. And because we really want to stay close to practical approach, we really want to do this in close collaboration with industry. So if you have any feedback, any questions, any interest in joint projects, really, please do reach out to me and we can see how we can collaborate. So you can basically find everything about LINDDUN and LINDDUN GO on our website. If you're new to privacy engineering, these are some sources that might be helpful. And of course, if you're new to threat modeling, or even if you're an expert already in threat modeling, the threat modeling book by Adam Shostak is really something you should look into. Okay, that was it for me so far. If there are any questions, feel free to shoot. And I'm also really looking forward to hear the feedback from Mario, who applied it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kim. So actually, I think I would start by asking you a question, and then I'd go on to talk about my experience with the framework as well. So with regards to your experience in seeing companies adopt LINDDUN as a framework to manage privacy engineering, would you see that there's either in terms of internal engagement with your organization? Because at the end of the day, one of the challenges that I've had, for instance, in applying LINDDUN is that it touches everywhere in the organization. You need to have conversations potentially about it with legal, with your data protection team, with your engineering, with your operations. If you're doing the full threat modeling approach, it's going to potentially impact a lot of people within an organization, right? So is there anything in particular that you think makes a successful LINDDUN implementation?
That's a good question. So from the academic perspective, I'm kind of secured from that. We do sometimes some assessments on demand, but that's indeed always based request from the technical department. Ideally, yeah, I mean, that's a really hard question. I think you already have more experience with that from your security industry experience, how you do that. I think it's related to that. And in addition, for privacy, you need to get the legal department involved there. I have been talking with some TPOs, and we also have close collaboration with legal experts, and they are always really excited about LINDDUN and LINDDUN GO because, well, I'm not gonna say it's really close to them, but it helps them kind of bridge the gap and getting some of the concepts translated into a technical part, but honestly giving you like the great tips to do it all together. Maybe you can share some experiences on how you convince people to collaborate from a security perspective, because I would really be interested in that as well.
Okay, let's do that then. So I've been using LINDDUN or trying to use LINDDUN for about 1.5 to 2 years now. So what I found is, in the meantime, I became a consultant. So I do a lot of work with different companies, etc. So one of the challenges that I found with LINDDUN was alluding to what I was mentioning. So it needs buy-in from a lot of different places in the organization. And usually, I think I still haven't had, I think I will have that opportunity soon, but it hasn't happened yet, of being able to take a greenfield type approach. So people don't have anything and building it from scratch. I think when you build it from scratch, doing LINDDUN, I don't think it's going to be all that onerous, because you can build the ceremonies and the processes around how you want to deal with them. and as you mentioned, one of the things that I've done for a lot of my clients, even when I was a permanent employee, is really making sure that when we are asking questions to the business, to the operations teams, to the engineering teams, we do it once and we cover in the same artifact both security and privacy, right? So that we're not tiring people with multiple forms, multiple artifacts, because our concerns are usually aligned in some way or they're complementary. It just makes more sense from a governance perspective to reuse as much as possible and not have people having to deal with some stakeholders for a process and another stakeholders for another process. That makes everyone unhappy and challenging to manage. But the challenge I've seen was when you're not starting greenfield, that part of what the threat modeling approach covers is already handled by a different team, and they've already made up their mind on how they want to deal with it, right? So for instance, that initial part on understanding from the risk assessment, how then that gets translated into the types of threats that engineering will be looking for, that's the bit that is usually missing. And I've tried a few different things and I think I've made them better, but I'm still yet to have enough experience to say, I think this is how you should do it, because I've done it 2 or 3 times and it works every time I've done it. Right?
Okay.
I haven't got into that type of anecdotal evidence yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep. So with regards to the using it themselves itself, so and that was also part of challenge that some other security people may find as well. So generally, I don't particularly like the approach of attack trees in security. It's not that they're not helpful. I think they are, but I don't tend to use them. I tend to use other ways of trying to come up with them. So their initial impact on seeing this is attack trees. Yeah, there was not. It's not my preferred way of doing it, but what it does do is it stopped my barriers to entry on becoming hopefully within the first median range of proficiency with it, right? Because following an attack tree is simpler if you're not a subject matter expert in data protection, right? So I think it serves a very good purpose. But what I would say that both LINDDUN and LINDDUN GO have were the key benefit was me being able to introduce shared language and shared acronyms with my stakeholders so we can actually discuss the problem space. For me, even if I wasn't doing the actual modeling approach in keeping in the full traceability, just the fact that I now can say a word like detectability, and I know that both myself and the person on the other side of the screen or on the side of the table understand the same meaning out of that word, and we understand what are the potential implications just by mentioning one word. I think it's highly valuable, even if for nothing else. Like Stride did, that's usually how I start implementing threat modeling for security as well. Is not starting with the robust frameworks. I start with his Stride. This is what each of the letters mean. Now tell me the problems that you already know exist in this language, please. Right, and then that opens the dialogue for people to say, okay, I've got this problem. I think it relates to identifiability or linkability. And then it puts me in the position also as a consultant to be more in listening mode, but also helping me on getting the outputs from them and then formatting them back to management in a more data protection type lingo, right, that the other stakeholders will understand, but also giving the people that truly understand the system, which are usually the engineers and the developers, to have a chance of commenting on the overall security or privacy posture of what it is they're building. Yeah, and finally, the PET references, so privacy enhancing techniques references. So having that catalog that I can say, okay, we've got a problem with linkability. What can we do about it? So sometimes I tend to use that in some other documents from MINISA and NATO, I think, on the privacy enhancing techniques, and I use them as the kind of a catalog of things. Okay, we've identified this problem. These are a few different ways of dealing with that particular problem. But I'd say most of my experience is probably not so much on the full end-to-end modeling. I was never able to do one of those completely end-to-end, but in using parts of it, that I can have a conversation with the stakeholder that I'm directly supporting.
Okay, cool. Yeah, yeah. So it's good to hear, and kind of confirms other feedback we got from industry. A lot of people already mentioned indeed like the common language to talk both to technical people and legal and take it to management, that you can share the same vocabulary. And yeah, so the fact that it's not the end-to-end approach, I think it's very common, but I think the same applies to Stride. I've been talking to a lot of people also about that. You have like this 50 shades of how to apply it.
Yep.
And it's not that one is better than the other, it's just that you find your own way into applying it. And from an academic perspective, it would be great if everybody like does it the same way. But of course, in practice, it's not the case. I mean, if we apply it ourselves, we will also do it our own way, because you get more experience within how to do it, and you will find your own way. So I think that's perfectly fine.
So what I've been doing lately is trying to introduce LINDDUN Go to my customers. I go through the key cards just to explain the concepts, and then what I usually do is, if I have for instance an architecture diagram or a data flow diagram in advance, I will pre-select out of the many cards that we have with each of the different threads. I will pre-select a few, like 10 or 15, how much time I think the time fits. And then what I usually do is, instead of doing the whole kind of playing the game, I just turn them upside down and I go around the room and say, pick one. Now, can you read it to the room? Let's have a conversation where, if you can think where that could be happening. Yeah, and that's lately how I've been using it since I started using LINDDUN Go as well.
Okay, cool. And do you see like a recurring pattern on the cards that you select? We're thinking of making like some addendum where we say like these are more likely to occur, or in those kind of contexts these are more likely to occur, and you can kind of safely put those aside.
Yep. So but, actually, yeah. I have. I think it comes back a bit around the LINDDUN, kind of the Stride by element type of approach that LINDDUN also takes. But so one of the companies that I'm currently supporting, they have a few backend services and only a few front-end ones. So that is one of the things that became immediately clear trying to use LINDDUN with both of them, was that most of the unawareness piece was obviously more towards the front end, and it was more on the back end, it was more about the heavy processing and things around anonymization and all of that. So kind of everything that was more about data minimization for the back end, and everything that was more legal and compliance to the front end. Yeah. I think there will be in the work that I need to do with one of my customers in the next few weeks, I think one approach that I like to take is, knowing that I need to go have a conversation with legal about some of these things, is to look at some of the threats on unawareness mainly and non-compliance, and try to prepare that as themes to go into a conversation. Yeah. Also, because another aspect I think of LINDDUN that it's sometimes not very easy to grasp is that it's really tying in knowledge from a lot of different expert areas, right? So we're talking about legal on one hand, we're talking engineering on another, operations in another one. So there's a lot of different fields, and there isn't a single vocabulary that unites all of these areas, right? We know everyone who's done Agile for long enough knows that even when people working together, it's sometimes difficult, right? Because you've got experts with different areas, not necessarily with a lot of the information to discuss a problem space, right? More than anything.
Yeah. So, like, just one minor comment when you say the unawareness and non-compliance is kind of front end. I think it's mostly the case, but I just want to highlight that in some cases it can be that the data subject is not actually a user of the system, although then maybe you should find a way to make transparent to the data subject. So then it might end up in the backend that you make sure that there are some rights, or there needs to be something implemented that the data subject can also be part of the system as a user.
Yep. Okay. Good point. So we've got a few questions here.
Okay.
So from Vikas, is there a way we can start identifying threats while building the data flow diagram, kind of linking the creation of the data flow diagram with privacy threat modeling?
I'm not sure whether, can you see whether Laurens is part? I can see it myself probably.
Not
no.
with that name.
Okay. So that's kind of, so my colleague Laurens Sion is mainly working on that. So I'm not completely sure whether it's already there or it's in the pipeline, but when you, so he has a tool where you build a DFD, but it also has some kind of patterns with solutions that you can implement. And when you drag that in, that will already immediately impact the risk assessment that is going on in the back. If you implement, if you drag in a secure pipe, for example, in the DFD, then the calculations already take that in the risk assessment. So in tool support ways, it's possible. I'm not sure whether the question was about making that an automated thing or doing it manually.
Yeah, the question was more, if I understood correctly, on starting to identify some of those threats. So I think that's where the approach, not so much the visual part, but the table, the mapping table, where, for instance, if you're talking about a data store, an entity, that there are a particular family of threats that may be relevant to what it is that you're building. And maybe I would say that would be the way that I would visualize it, starting with that first, and then if the concept of hotspots that you were referring to previously. So if it's a hotspot for this type of threat, then we can add some references to the data flow diagrams. I particularly, it's probably, I'm not sure this is something that more people would do, but also because I come from security background, I tend to like to add the words within LINDDUN as a visual cue on the data flow diagram. So the same that I would do with Stride. So I like to, if a particular element is a gateway, so I know that usually almost all of the Stride elements will be applicable. And then that serves as a visual way to start trimming down what the scope is that that we want to get into.
Yeah. So the short answer is no. Currently, I do not have clear guidance there. LINDDUN and Go is kind of the first step to extend and update the knowledge base. And like you mentioned, the hotspots already give some more information. So I think one of the next steps where we also look at the trees and the knowledge base as a whole would also be to, like you said, indeed, you can, by looking at the hotspots rather than just, or interaction based rather than just the element, you can already provide a lot more information and can already scope the assessment much more. So that's definitely in the short term to do list, but it's not that I can like forward you the table or the solutions there today. No, unfortunately.
Yeah, the second question I think is very related to this one as well, which is around the tools to support LINDDUN in a DevOps context. Would you have any ideas on that, or know of any practices in that space?
Yeah, so obviously I'm familiar with the tool of my colleague. I know there are other commercial tools. I must say it's been a while since I've tried them myself, but I think the knowledge itself, well, it's all available. I think it can be included there as well. That's also why we are still dreaming of that big knowledge base that we can update and that can easily give outputs both to an interactive catalog that you can browse to, and that provides some information that can be pulled into a tool and always has up-to-date information and different context or domain-specific refinements coming out of that. So yes, I think it's doable. The tool of my colleague already includes some parts of it, I think. It's in beta and it's still being tested and developed further. I'm not aware of any commercial tools using it, but if they are, please feel free to let me know. Yeah, I think it would be interesting because there's this synergy still between security and privacy, and it's so closely related to security threat modeling that it would make sense to combine it. You have the same inputs, so it would be great. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I'm trying. That's the type of thing that I attempt to do with my customers. So I don't have kind of a full-on success story. I think we've done in a few of them steps forward that are quite significant. At least in, again, it's not particularly as a consultant. It's not so much for me to fully fix the problems, right? Because usually, if I just try and do kind of my work, I end up failing, right? Because I'm getting I go speak with legal, I go speak with engineering, and I get so many conflicting asks of what they expect from the thing that I have no option but to serve as a bridge of communication between them, right? So having tools like or having artifacts like Stride and like LINDDUN really make that that work much simpler.
Okay.
Yeah. So any other questions from the audience? I'm not seeing. I hope those answers were that your questions were answered. If there are no more last-minute questions, I'll leave it open for 20 seconds. I think I would thank you very much, Kim. It was a really brilliant session. Would you like to finish with some just an overall thought on starting down the road of LINDDUN? What would you? How can people start?
Yeah, so I would recommend to start with LINDDUN Go because I personally have the feeling that it really lowers the thresholds, as the trees can be maybe a bit overwhelming privacy content-wise. Everything is available on the website. Also, it's not there yet, but I'm planning to also include some like background material. I shared it on the OWASP threat modeling Slack once, or part of it, like stuff about like the Fitzman and Hanse paper, which is basically the work that LINDDUN based the linkability, identifiability, detectability categories on. So we really plan to extend the material more that can make you even a more expert in privacy and threat modeling. And yeah, so my main shout out would be if you have any comments or feedback, or just if you've looked at it and used it, feel free to share. We are always looking for input and collaboration. And I really thank you all for joining. It's great to see that there is so much interest in privacy engineering, privacy threat modeling.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much for everyone in the audience as well. So we had more than 20 people throughout the session, so that was really good. I hope it was useful. And as we mentioned at the beginning, the recording will be online in the next 24 to 48 hours. And thank you very much for joining. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.